Hey Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ketaki, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I know we're on different time zones. It's morning here, late night for you,
Yeah.
but I love your energy. I'm excited. I am pumped to have this conversation.
Yeah, I can always find time for conversations like these, and especially with you, I am today. I think in the next 30 minutes, I want to really understand what empathy does, and I don't think we have a lot of conversations around the word empathy in this world because we talk about all things professional, we talk about finding ourselves, but somewhere along the line, empathy gets lost. So I hope to understand from you today how we can better understand each other and how can we evolve as compassionate human beings in this world, because that would definitely lead to a beautiful world to live in. And I hope
Oh.
you get us there with all the work that you're doing. So it's amazing that people like you exist who are working towards that.
Oh, I am touched and honored, and I am hoping to learn from you and learn how just this conversation, learn your perspective and gain yet another perspective in my library. And I would love to share whatever I can. I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So the first thing that I want to understand is, so you are known by Captain Empathy. I want to understand the story behind that and what led to the entire Jago movement in the world.
Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah, so the story. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in India, moved to US, um, and in India, I didn't really fit into everything. I'm gay. Growing up, I was pretty fat, pretty lot of pimples, and so I didn't fit into the rich kids groups. I didn't fit into the good looking kids groups. I didn't fit into even the misfits groups as much because I couldn't figure out myself. I couldn't figure out
Hmm.
my identity. Didn't feel like I belonged anywhere in
Yeah.
even in the culture itself. When I moved, I picked Florida. I said I'll go farthest away than so that I don't know anyone around me, so I can be myself and find myself. But the reality is, when I moved here to Florida, I wasn't myself either. I couldn't be myself because I still didn't know who I was at the same time. But I went to just like very stereotypical, like an Indian boy, go to get your computer and electrical engineering degree because that's what dad, that's what your dad wants. That's what my brother did. That's what my grandfather's done. It's just this engineering degree, engineering family.
Yeah,
Got
and
my
that's
engineering
the
degree.
coolest thing to do in India.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's check mark you get so that you get all those wedding proposals after you graduate, which I started getting. And that's when I had to come out and tell my parents. And so I got my engineering degree, graduated in 2009, and I um, was looking for a job. I luckily, even though during the big financial collapse of 2008 and 2009, I found a job putting internet and TV on planes. So like building tech that goes for the internet and TV on planes. So the screens on the planes and the internet that makes it happen. So I
Oh,
was one of the people. And then sort of my career evolved into product management. And this is where sort of empathy started forming for me. So when I was doing test engineering, integration and test engineering, so I had to really channel the customers and the users on the plane to do my job well. And that required empathy to do it. And so sort of that started building my empathy muscle. And then and I didn't know what empathy was at that point. It was just sort of naturally aligning there. And I saw that the planes were now connected to the internet, and they're just IoT products, Internet of Things products now, because if you're connected to the internet and you have all this data, we can build a platform around it. So I invented and led the team to build the world's first IoT for planes platform for commercial airlines, and we launched it. And this was again requiring me to lead people, influence people without authority, and all of these things required empathy. Fast forward to 3 years ago, my husband and I, and our dog and I, we moved to Seattle to join a company where we made tech for law enforcement. We with the mission of protecting life. Policing is, as the world knows, is really big, controversial in the United States, and for the mission was how do we create products and technology to drive accountability to protect life. And I was deep in there, traveled the world, sat with police officers, police chiefs, went on police cars, ride-alongs, and just really absorbed. And I connected with people who I would never really connect with, people on the opposite spectrum of religion and politics and all of these other things. And we became close friends because I was able to understand their perspective. They were able to understand a little bit of my own, and we started building that. However, in 2020, when George Floyd's murder happened in the United States, the next trading day, the company stock hit an all-time high, and I became wealthier off of someone's murder. I made more money that day because someone was killed and the conflict existed. So what I realized is the intent of what happened is not matching the impact of what really happened. And I saw the police using my products against the protesters, the Black Lives Matter protesters. And that really broke me. They used the phrase, we broke their spirit, so they didn't come and protest the next day. And that was not the intention. And so, throughout, I was a business leader at the company. I had a special compensation contract that because of the impact I'd made at the company, leading big IoT platforms and transforming that industry, and in doing work there, that gave me a $15 million contract over 8 years, compensation that I was going to get. And I ended up resigning. I ended up giving that all up without a job or a plan during the peak of the pandemic here. And in that moment, I asked myself, what is my differentiator? And I realized during the career, what I was good at, why I was good at my job as a people manager, as a leader, as a product manager, was because of empathy. Empathy was that core fundamental thing that allowed me to put myself in the customer's experience or the other people in the company. And that's what led me to be great. And then I asked myself, how do we solve the problems of the polarization that's not only happening in the United States, that's happening globally? And what are the goals of diversity, equity, inclusion, breaking down the toxic hierarchical structures that exist in capitalistic, in all countries really, and the white supremacy based or the governing, like whatever the governing system based supremacy system and oppressive system is there. How do we break that down? How do we drive fundamental change? And the answer to me was, all these are great goals, but the way to get there is empathy, because that's the only way we're going to get there. Even solving climate change will require empathy. We need to build a community that is going to fight this together. We can't individually do it. We can do individually at our home, recycle more, use less products, even for climate change or everything. Those are great things we should do. But to solve the problem fundamentally or to change the system fundamentally, we need to come as a community. We need to understand each other. And so that sort of became the idea of, okay, we need to help people learn empathy. How do you scale learning empathy? Because my tech brain came in and like, okay, the problem isn't people aren't willing, like they're one-on-one, these conversations, we learn empathy, but to learn empathy at scale, we need something different. And so that's where Jago came. The Jago, which means to wake up. And it was the idea our mission is to create a world where people seek to understand one another by making empathy a daily habit. And we built and launched the world's first mobile app-based empathy gym. So our whole pitch is, just like if you got a personal trainer and you sort of did it one day and then the rest of the year you didn't work out, it's not going to change anything. Similarly, for diversity, equity, inclusion training or anything else, just like you work out your physical body, you need to work and build the empathy muscle, and you need an empathy gym for that. And that's what we built.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you've put it, that it's the empathy gym that we should hit every day. And we do understand, we all are conditioned to understand that if we don't work out, we are not going to be fit. But somehow happiness, empathy, all of these things are also a workout on its own. And that is forgotten by people. So how do you think people can inculcate the muscle of empathy? Apart from following your app, of course, but how can they build that empathy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the first thing is understanding what empathy means. Empathy and sympathy, right? So empathy means is to put yourself in the perspective of others, or try to understand the perspective of others. That's how I sort of explain it. So what that means is I understand what my perspective is. I can separate my perspective and then try to understand. So in this case, Ketaki, I can try to understand what your perspective is, because your perspective is formed by your intersectional identity, where you grew up, who are your parents, if you had siblings or not, what school you went to, what socioeconomic background you came from, religious, all these things form your perspective, and your perspective is unique. Just like everyone's fingerprints, everyone's perspective is unique. And so we need to first accept that everyone's perspective is unique. Don't try to put your perspective into others. So for example, if I don't like eating, let's say if I don't like eating a burger, it doesn't mean everyone else doesn't like eating a burger. And I know it's a simple example. So for empathy, to learn empathy, the first thing everyone needs to just tell themselves, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
That's accepting that, because a lot of us, even I grew up like, oh, I know my shit, right? I'm like, oh yeah. I was like that guy, right?
Yeah.
But then you realize I don't know what I don't know, and come with curiosity. If you just start with curiosity, let me be curious. That's your first steps towards empathy.
Absolutely.
And obviously our app will help.
Absolutely. So you talked about sympathy and empathy. So tell us about how it's different, because the usual reaction that we have when anyone is putting forward their perspective is sympathy. So what is the difference between sympathy and empathy, and how do we put empathy first and sympathy later?
Yeah. Well, I don't think sympathy should, so here's how I look at it first is, sympathy is being like, so let's say you hurt yourself or you fell and you scratched your knee. So sympathy is basically, oh, if I was in your place, I would not like it. So I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
So in this moment, sympathy is about a selfish thing. It's about, oh, how I would feel if I got hurt. So I'm sorry that happened to you. So if someone dies in your family and says sorry for your loss, or someone dies, or like if you get hurt, like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Or if you get sick, what that really is doing is acknowledging that other person went through that, yes, but the other person still feels in pain and lonely. So if I told you, oh, I'm sorry you hurt yourself, you still are in pain, and you're still feeling like, oh, they're sorry, but they're good.
Yeah.
Empathy is sitting with you, feeling like, oh my gosh, that sucks. Yeah, I know what this pains feel like. And in just that little change of mindset, the other person doesn't feel alone, and they know someone is sharing their pain with them. And that's a very powerful act. It's a vulnerable act. It's an act that builds that community, builds that connection, builds that deeper thing. So I don't think sympathy should exist, to be honest. It is a very selfish act. I grew up in India, and my lens of the culture that I grew up in was a very sympathy-based culture.
Yeah.
Which was, oh, like in India, the culture is, oh, treat your guest like a god, or do all these things. But one of the things I grew up is, as soon as someone leaves, you're going to talk about them behind their back. You're gonna be like, oh, I know, like he drinks, or he eats meat, or he does this and this. This is a very sympathy driven culture. An empathy driven culture is like, oh, let me understand why he drinks, or let me understand why they don't eat meat, or I grew up vegetarian, but every time I went to a meal with my friends, they would make fun of being a vegetarian, and because they would eat meat, and so all of these things come from like a place of sympathy, sort of, a little bit, but also sympathy doesn't make people feel better. Sympathy is, what makes people feel better is that knowing someone understands your pain, feels it, maybe and relate, and they're there with you to help you out of the pain. So an example Brene Brown puts in is, let's say someone fell into the well. Sympathy is looking down and says, hey, sucks, you fell into the well. Empathy is, you know what, I'm gonna take a rope, I'm gonna come down, I'm gonna sit with you in the well, and then I know how to get you out.
Yeah, that's really nice. And that reminds me of me going to college, and there were a few roommates. So they had this condition that only vegetarian roommates would be permitted in their room. And I can totally relate to the sympathy-based culture that exists in some parts of India. Definitely it does. And I want to understand from you that when we all, with our upbringing and with the perspective that we have some assumptions, and we don't know that those assumptions exist, but they kick in when we talk to others and when we are trying to understand them. So how can we get over those assumptions and then better understand each other?
Yeah. So the first thing is, we need to stop assuming. To get like, that's really like, and that takes some work, and that's why we built the app, because I knew it wasn't something you can just do. So by just asking people stories. So instead of assuming, if you see someone coming and getting out of a BMW, don't assume that they are a rich, spoiled brat or something. That's an assumption that we have, the bias that's built into us. Let's find out their story. their story might be that they're rich, but they might have earned it, or they might have worked hard for it. Or even if they're rich, spoiled brat, maybe they didn't have parents around to take care of them. And this is the upbringing that they came into. And then they didn't, this is the lens they see the world through. So by asking people their story, asking questions, being curious, that is really important. And to get there, you have to understand yourself. So everyone should start by understanding themselves, understanding who they are. What is their perspective? What is their intersectional identity? What formed their perspective on the world? Who is their authentic self? Once you do that, you're able to remove your own assumptions and understand, oh, that was my bias. As soon as if I heard Ketki's name, my bias could be that it's Ketki Gujarati, for example. I don't know, but that's an assumption I'm making without me asking to.
I get so much of that.
Yeah, and exactly. And so instead of me coming and asking, hey, Ketki, what language do you speak? Or where did you grow up? And then that brings a connection. The other person, people as humans love talking about themselves and love talking about their story. So by someone asking that story, you're showing the first sign of vulnerability. You're showing the first sign of courage by that I want to learn. And the other person now gets to share, and you build a connection, and it helps. Then remember, oh, my bias was Ketki was Gujarati, but then Ketki told me that she's not. Oh my goodness, I realized that was my bias. And that's how you started breaking down those assumptions.
So it's about taking the first step and letting them drive the conversation, right?
Yeah. Same as instead of assuming that someone is straight, like, hey, you're married, like, here, let's get you married to so-and-so, you're the opposite gender, or this, like, why? Let's find out what do they want? Do they even want to get married? Like, that is a big, I honestly think that is the epidemic in India, is the epidemic of let's get everyone married.
Tell me about it. Yeah, especially when you approach this age of 25, everyone looks at you from a different angle. Okay, because either you're getting married and then it's okay. If you're not getting married, then there's definitely a problem.
Yeah, and why is that a problem? Yeah, and so many people are in unhappy marriages because of this. People are fundamentally unhappy, and that's why I call this an epidemic. It's a mental health epidemic, and sometimes it's even a physical health epidemic because women are abused in those marriages.
Yeah, that is a problem that needs to be addressed, and again, it has to be approached with this empathy mindset. We've so far talked about empathy in a personal context, but let's take it to the professional context and try to understand how that is different. So do you think understanding people at workplace, is it any different from understanding anyone when you meet them personally? Is it different?
So I think that is the fundamental problem, is people spend 1/3 or more of their life working. This is part of life. And we have created this artificial structure of professional and personal, and the it's a form of, it's from the white supremacy colonization system that comes in by creating these systems. And here's a simple example that a lot of the Indian listeners will sort of relate to, is when Britain was colonizing India, the reason they created these, you have to wear this uniform, you have to act this way, you have to behave this way when you're working, and if you don't get paid, and you don't get this nice job where you're safer, where your life is safer. And that was what professional was, and that's where professional has originated from. So this whole idea that people should be different when they're professional and when they're personal, what that's doing is basically breaking, like, let's cut your identity and only take the parts that I care about, that fit my colonizing white supremacy led system.
Yeah.
Versus let me go ahead and bring the whole person. Because when I go to work right now, I bring my whole self to work. And so when you, in a professional setting, understand the humans behind the titles, understand who it is. So the part of it is share your story. An example is when I wasn't out for a while in companies as a gay man, and people would share, oh, this weekend my wife, my kids and I would do this, and I wouldn't be able to share that in the workplace. I wouldn't be able to say, oh, my husband and I, or my partner and I, we did this, because I wasn't out. And so that's an example of where I couldn't bring part of my life to a workplace when some other people could. And it's just where you are on the privilege spectrum, that you can bring different aspects of your full self to work. So if you're the CEO, if you notice, CEOs, they bring their whole self to work because they have no fear. They are in charge, and this is their space. But as you go lower and lower, people have different aspects. Like in US, Black women are afraid of bringing their natural hair to work because there's data that shows that they've been fired. What if in India there might be someone who goes to a company, and just because of what caste they were born into, they have to hide that caste just so they can get a job. And so this is these professional boundaries that have been created. What professional should be is
Hmm.
accountability towards your commitment. That's it. I made a commitment to write this code. I made the commitment to build this product. That is I should be professional in making sure I deliver to my commitment. Or if I'm making mistakes, learning from those and then working towards getting help and delivering to my commitment. That's the level of professional what I understand. Everything else, be yourself.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because people usually wear a mask of professionalism when they are at work, and they feel that they have to restrict themselves. They don't have to share their personal details, and they have to have this refined and reserved image where they are reticent, they don't talk a lot, and they are not going to share a lot of their aspects, just so that they can protect their identity and they don't have to be vulnerable in the first place. Right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also it's not only that, I think it's also because the system is set up that
Hmm.
it forces people to not be this way. It's creating an environment subconsciously and intentionally where it's like the companies will say you need to be a culture fit. You need to fit with us, not be yourself and bring like I say like make it a culture ad. So if you're coming to the company, bring your culture and improve us overall, and add to that versus fit into how our mold is. And the other piece is like for me, I was able to free myself quite a bit when I'm like, I'm just going to be myself. If you don't like that, all right, I'm out. And I do recognize that I have the privilege to be able to say that. Not many people have that privilege to be able to say that. But
Yeah.
I'm then speaking up so that other people can get that privilege to be able to say that. I have a close friend who we are friends for years, and then recently he's a co-founder on Jago with me. And one of the reasons he said I was really excited of joining the team when I invited him as a co-founder was he wanted to see how I was different in my professional setting versus in a personal setting. And then after he got to see it, he was like, oh, you're the same person. There's no difference. That's what his feedback was. And I have the privilege to be able to do that. It is a privilege to be your authentic self in professional settings and workplaces. And the way people can enable other people to do it is by, if they have the privilege and not the fear, then do it. Be your full self. So then other people can see you and be like, oh, inspired by you. And they can then see that this is a safe space to be themselves.
Yeah, and but while I completely understand that there's a loophole to that, right? Because let's say that your boss does not agree with you on this, and that's
So
where
then it's
people are
not
the
a safe
most scared.
space.
So then it's not the correct place to work.
Yeah, that's not a psychologically safe space. That is a toxic place. So these are the red flags. A toxic
Hmm.
place is a boss is not okay, or leadership is not okay with parts of you that are a form of your identity, like natural hair for Black women, or it could be if you're queer, or it could be even if you're a vegetarian and the boss is a meat eater, or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
It That's a toxic place, and that's a space where if you can't be yourself, where you're spending a third of your life or more, that's that's negative on your mental health.
It's very exhausting, and it becomes a part of your identity where you then start masking yourself and forgetting who you originally were, and then you're just trying to be someone else just to fit in, and
Yeah,
all of that for the next promotion and the corporate
yeah,
ladder. Nothing else,
yeah.
right?
And that's the system is designed. It's the system, and the whole American dream. What was that? It's another white oppressive system. It's only the American dream if you're white. For everyone else, it's a tool so that we all look at it and be like, oh yeah, I want that, I want that, I want that. Let me chase, 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 chase. So when you do that, you put everything of yourself away, the creativity away. You're just chasing that job. You're just trying to get that next promotion and get that house and car and live this life and be non-disruptive. But what it is it's really just follow our system so that you can have a comfortable life. If you follow our ways, that's it. Then you're happy. If you don't follow our ways, you're going to be in jail. You're going to be miserable. And so it is. We are living in a dystopia. In India, it's in even though in India, US, Europe, all these democratic systems are dystopias. Look at the amount of people that are in the prison system that are slaves. In India, poverty is so extreme. There's people who are living in such a large population without knowing what their next meal is going to come from, or even if they will have a next meal. And this is how can it not be a dystopia that we're living in when this is such a large population is suffering?
Yeah, that's definitely true, and it'll take many people like you to bring that difference, because we all have to at least try to improve ourselves by 1% and being a little more
Yeah.
empathetic and leading through action. It's not just having conversations like these, but actually making something out of it that can lead to a difference.
Yeah, share your story. Really, the simplest thing. And I know it takes a lot of vulnerability to share your story. I get it. And sometimes it's a privilege to even be able to share your story. Like this is a privilege for me to be able to do this and share my story and have a conversation across the world with you.
Hmm.
But I I definitely think that listen to other people's stories, share your story, believe other people's stories. Large part of the population in US doesn't believe the story of other people, and that is fundamentally a challenge because that it comes back to empathy because they're like, oh, it didn't happen to me, so it can't be true to them.
Yeah, and it's especially true even when we watch these videos on social media where people are openly sharing their stories, and we just feel that it's all a publicity stunt or something, right? Where we don't believe it.
Yeah, that's a great example. Like, and that's a very common thing that used to happen
Yeah.
when women share it as well or something. And like, yes, basically we're saying because there's like one or two people that might lie, everyone's a liar.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said that it's a privilege to share your story. So how can one muster the courage that's required to do so? Because it has to be a right rather than a privilege.
Yeah, I would say step one, if you feel like you are in a system where sharing your story might harm you financially in any other way, socially, economically, share your system a story anonymously. Find platforms where you can just share a story anonymously.
Yeah.
See the support. When people will reflect to their story, then you'll feel a little bit more courageous. Find places, safe spaces where you can share your story. You can share a story in Jago. You can just record a video because it is mostly anonymous in Jago. So your name is not attached to your story. Your profile is just really about your story. And so the idea is if you start just telling your story, just tell your story in a mirror. Start there. Just
Yeah.
tell yourself your story. A lot of people I realize in this work that I'm doing have not told themselves their story. What is your story, Katie? I want to let's if you're okay. What is your story?
My story is that I always used to get good grades and everything, and I was living in a different world by that time, where I thought that I am the ideal daughter that parents would like to have and everything, right? And then I started my professional world, and I looked at people around me. I started to understand that people can be so different, and it's not just about the marks, because that's when I started questioning myself. I started questioning my abilities. I started doubting myself at a lot of times, and along the way I even lost my confidence a few times, and it took me 3 years to really find myself, to find the work that I was loving to do, to find what I truly am. And even this podcast was a part of it, and it's still in progress. I haven't found myself completely, but at least I'm on the path of increasing my self awareness. And I don't think all of this was really taught to us in school, where we should have been told that we are likely to misunderstand ourselves, because just
Hmm.
that is a very big shock to experience, where where you
Yeah.
think that you know yourself so well, and then there comes a point where you feel like you were totally someone else, and now you're a different part. So I'm still figuring myself out along the way. I haven't done it completely, but at least talking to people like you and having a lot of these conversations on the podcast, that has helped me to view life through different perspectives. That's just a very short version, but that's just it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I know I put you on the spot. We hadn't planned
No
this,
problem at
but
all.
I appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable with me. And yeah, I think one thing you said during your story that was really powerful, which was as you grow up, these systems are sort of what define who we are.
Yeah.
When like I grew up, people calling me fat and ugly, or you're really fat. Like I'm not even kidding. Like, walking on the street, some stranger would just call me fat, right? In India,
Mhm.
um and those is how I started seeing myself.
Yeah.
Our identity, our perspective is shaped by how our external stimuli when we're growing, because then we're figuring this out. And so we are so cruel to each other because it's a cycle.
Hmm.
I was cruel to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
I was bullied or I was called that. And so I just followed that behavior because that's all I saw around me. And so that's what you role model. And so that's where the fundamental problem in the system. We need to break that cycle because I saw myself as ugly and fat. And it took me until this year, last year,
Hmm.
late last year for finally seeing myself and loving myself. I was finally able to see my picture or see myself in a mirror and not hate myself. And it took me 34 years to get there of my life.
Yeah, and it's funny how we talk about personal brand and all of this, right? But right from our childhood, we are given these tags that you are the smart kid, you're the hardworking
Yeah.
kid. So I've had instances where my brother, at times, he hasn't been able to get good marks, and then he was given my example saying that this is the hardworking girl that you have to follow. And it's not
Yeah.
necessary that everyone would really love studying or marks would not
Yeah.
be their goal.
And the system, the education system is a memory-based system. It's a system created for large population to do, like the whole entrance exam system and all of these things that are established in the piece. It is such, if you think about it, is one of the most exclusive systems. Basically, millions of people are going to do the exam and only a small percentage come in, and that's the people we care about. Everyone else is an idiot.
Layer.
Yeah, and what is it is such a, think about it, what we're doing is putting shame. The system is around shame and creating like, this is the only people we care about, everyone else is shit. And like you said about I have a similar, my brother like went to the similar experience. My parents compared me to him and him to me, and he then had a shitty like experience because he wasn't felt understood. He didn't feel like his identity was understood, and he probably is suffering from mental health because of that. And I completely agree. We have to start questioning everything. Question everything. Don't just accept the system because it exists. India is a system that's based on religion. It's based on values that were established years ago. We should be challenging everything. If someone says like, oh, you should, like, I'll fundamentally say, oh, you should put money down for this idol. Why? Is it helping someone in the poor coming out of poverty? Is it help change climate change? Is it help build someone happiness or joy? What is it doing? Ask questions everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that we have been living in these systems and they become such an ingrained version of ourselves that we eventually stop questioning and we think that that is the reality, and that becomes our reality, that becomes our identity. And then there comes a point where we just lose that spark and we stop finding ourselves because we just want to fit in and we are exhausted and we are done. And then we give up.
Yeah, fitting in is a powerful thing because then you feel belong. Sense of belonging is what humans look for. We are communal. We are evolved to be communal. So when you fit in, even if it is at the cost of your own values and authenticity, we are okay. We get comfortable there. For example, I grew up very religious and I was very involved in the religion, and I fit in because I behaved like them. I behaved like everyone else. And so they brought me in closer and closer into the circle, in the inner circle of the religion. And I'm atheist right now. And to me, when I was in there, I saw the reality of the religion, that it was all about money, that was all corruption, all of those things. But they brought me closer and closer and closer inside. And I started seeing like the hypocrisy and all the shittiness of that, of this organization. And why? Because I fit in, even though it was at the cost of my own happiness and values.
Yeah, and we each have our unique perspective and potential, and I think we at any cost we have to try to embrace that part of ourselves. And even though we have to stand out and we lose our community at some point, but we do find our own family through that. It's not necessary that everyone would always agree to you, or even if your family, your actual family would agree with you. But it's possible that when you stand up and when you speak out, then maybe you can find your own community and you can find your own strength.
Yeah.
And then I think that's all the strength that we need if we are just overthinking all of these aspects. And I really appreciate you sharing all of this, Kevin, because it is going to open up a lot of our eyes, and it's going to open up a world of possibilities for us to start living our lives the way we want, and not because someone has asked us to live our lives that way.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's exactly, love the takeaway. I couldn't have said it better. So thank you.
So I'll link everything that's needed in the description, and I hope that this conversation is helpful to all of our viewers. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation. What a great way to start on Saturday.
I'm going to have a great
Saturday
after this.
Yeah.